Diversity in Sherlock panel. So, pretty much this is talking about like different types of neurodiversity in different adaptations in the Holmesian world. My name is Lucas Shelk. I run the Autistic Sherlock in Elementary Tumblr. Some of you might be aware of it, some of you might not be. If you don't, I have contact info so you can creep on it later. I use he, him, and his pronouns, they, them, and their pronouns, and I will be talking about how the CBS Elementary adaptation of Sherlock Holmes is autistic coded and what that means precisely.
My name is Rose. Some of you might know me as Golden Hearted Rose on Tumblr. I'm going to be talking a little bit about ACD and BBC Sherlock again as autistic coded. ACD, this diagnosis didn't exist back then, so I use they and them pronouns.
Hello, I am Casey. I am Boom Sherlocka on Tumblr. I use she, her pronouns. I'm talking specifically about how Holmes in BBC Sherlock has self-diagnosed as a sociopath, even though that's not a thing, and kind of what that means, and as someone who has antisocial personality disorder. So that's me.
Hey, my name is Bryn. I use he, him, his pronouns. I also blog hop a little too often. I used to be Jim the Web Spinner. I mean, that blog's still a thing, but I'm not really on there too much. Right now it's Prosthetical, which is a Bucky Barnes blog. And I'm going to be touching on the possibility or the interpretation of Sherlock Holmes as having bipolar disorder, and kind of focusing more on a little bit on the ACD canon and BBC Sherlock. I guess I can go ahead and give you the definition for neurodiversity, and once again, if we use any term you guys don't know, please feel free to raise your hands. So the definition I've got here for neurodiversity is neurodiversity, short for neurological diversity, refers to the I'm going to be tripping over my tongue all morning. Refers to the diversity of human brains and minds, and to the idea that this is a natural, valuable form of diversity. So this includes stuff like autism, stuff like different kinds of mental illness, developmental disabilities, all of that stuff. Do you want to go ahead?
Oh, sure. My name is Heather. I'm one of the directors here. It was very important that we have a moderator on this panel. Very important for reasons. I guess I could officially point at people who raise their hands so that they can ask their questions. That'll be a good job for me.
All right.
I use she, her, and hers pronouns.
All right. I guess, do we want to go this way, that way, this way?
You're the most organized. I'm the least organized. So let's start with you.
I've got 3 sets of notes, so I think it's yours.
Yeah.
My boyfriend calls me an overachiever. I think he might be right. All right. So before I get started with my piece, there has been a couple of interviews that 221BCon has been involved in that has kind of misinterpreted and generalized autistic people, and at one point misinterpreted what my research is about. Specifically in the Castro interview, I'm trying to find the notes for it here. Where are you? There we go. For the Castro interview and the What the Fangirl interview, if you guys listened to that at all, both of those interviews said that is Sherlock Holmes autistic? Is Sherlock Holmes just a jerk? And this is something that I want to... No. It's something I want to clarify, that it is possible to be autistic and a jerk. It's not a mutually exclusive thing. Like, it's possible for an autistic person, for a disabled person, to be as much of a jerk as a non-autistic person, as a non-disabled person. And the fact that so many people get that wrong is harmful and annoying, and yeah. And as far as getting like misinterpreting my research, for the Comcastro interview, one of the 221 Beacon leaders, I don't want to point names because that's not the point, they said that I stated Sherlock Holmes in elementary as having Asperger's. That is incorrect. That has never been featured on my Autistic Sherlock in Elementary website. I raised the possibility of him being autistic because he is so coded that way. And even if he was diagnosed today in the United States, it wouldn't be with Asperger's syndrome because that was removed from the DSM in 2013. And, you know, if he was living in the UK, that would be a different case because they still use that in, I believe it's called the ICD. Is it that?
It's ICD-10.
Yeah, the ICD-10. They still have that as a diagnosis, but given that elementary Sherlock is set in America, it's just not the case. That's inaccurate. But yeah, so, you know, getting rid of the, you know, nasty technical stuff. Now, talking about the fun of elementary, one of my favorite things to watch with this version of Sherlock Holmes is his stimming. Sherlock stims all the time. His finger stims, like, it's mostly like his pointer finger and thumb, or like his middle finger, just like, you know, just racing, you know, whenever he's trying to process something, or when he's like excited or agitated, and then his bouncing when he really needs to get something off of his chest, when he needs to info dump, share all of the information that's stored in his brain all at once. Otherwise, it's going to get so filled up that he just has a meltdown and everything just goes terribly wrong.
I know those feels.
Essentially, yeah.
Also, do you want me to do the quick definition of stimming?
Yeah,
Also
please.
coding, probably.
Yeah, okay, so stimming, self-stimulatory behavior, also known as stimming, and self-stimulation is the repetition of physical movements, sounds, or repetitive movement of objects, common in individuals with developmental disabilities, but most prevalent in people with autistic spectrum disorders. We've got some examples here, but this is I do want to point out that stimming is something that everyone does at some point or another. People just don't always call it that. Like, you know, you fiddle while you're in class, you know, you play with your pen, cap it, uncap it. You just tend to see it more often with people who are autistic, people who are neurodivergent in general, which neurodivergent is like the individual term for neurodiversity.
Yeah. It's pretty much an other thing. Like we're pathologized because we're considered as an other category in comparison to non-autistic people, to people who aren't neurodiverse. We typically call them neurotypical. There's differences between neurotypical people, allistic people, which is a relatively newer term, and autistic people. Allistic people are non-autistic people, but still have a mental variant, as it were. Like if they're somehow developmentally disabled, or if they have mental illness or mental illnesses and things like that, they're not neurotypical, but they're not autistic, so they're allistic. And that's something to really be adamant about knowing the differences, because, you know, in the past, there's only been the terms of autistic and neurotypical, which, you know, it's another binary that has its own set of problems, and it leaves out a lot of people who aren't either. So, yeah, and another thing about Sherlock's stimming, I want to point out specifically a sort of like,
While you do that, I'm going to do the definition for autistic coding.
yes, please.
So, similar to queer coding, autistic coding describes a character in a form of media that has traits associated with autistic people, but is not explicitly stated that they are autistic. So, for example, Sherlock from Elementary, Sherlock from BBC Sherlock. I don't know if any of you saw The Imitation Game, but so much yes. Yeah.
Yeah, don't really want to diverge into.
Yeah, don't want to go off on a tangent, but
Yeah. There's a correlation. I have a theory that there is a correlation between when Sherlock stops shutting down in front of Joan and when he starts doing more like finger stimming and things like that as sort of like a defense mechanism or survival mechanism. In season 1, episode 2, While You Were Sleeping, Joan threatens Sherlock with attack when he shuts down, or as Sherlock calls it, goes into a trance during a support group meeting. And in the episode where Joan goes to Hemdale, which was where Sherlock went to rehab, she talks to one of the counselors, one of the specialists there, and was saying how, Sherlock never contributed, he was quiet the whole time, and it's just like, well, he was probably shutting down the whole time because he didn't know what else to do. That was probably how he got by, And so, in between that and being threatened with attack during that particular support group meeting, we see less of Sherlock shutting down in front of Joan. There are a couple of instances where he comes back from a shutdown, or it's referenced in an off-screen moment where he shuts down, but most likely not in front of Joan since that point. And since then, he does a lot more finger stimming, which he learned that it won't get him threatened with physical violence, which, if you know the premise of Elementary, has been a theme, in Sherlock's past. He was physically abused in his youth, during his school years, and, he's been in a couple of physical altercations. I could rant all day about the Red Team. I could rant about Gregson and, how Clyde became his emotional therapy animal. Oh, I love Clyde so much, But I'm going to try not to info dump on that because, my other panelists also have insightful things to say.
Talk about the BBC Sherlock shutdown.
Yes,
season
please.
Yes.
In season 3.
Do you want me to do the definition of shutdown really quick?
Yes, do that first.
So, shutdown, like with a meltdown, a shutdown is a physiological response to being in an overwhelming situation. Signs of a shutdown include staring straight ahead, non-responsiveness, no movement, may seek out a small, safe, or dark place to be alone, and they may curl themselves up or lie in a fetal position. And this isn't just something you see with autistic people. You might see this in people with anxiety disorders and stuff like that.
So I think based on the definition, you might know what I'm going to talk about. But in season 3 of BBC Sherlock, when John asks Sherlock to be his best man, he stares straight ahead, just blinks and blinks and blinks, and that's he's in the past talked about how his brain is like a computer, and it's just like when your brain is so overloaded because you're trying to process so much information at once, or unexpected information that you're just completely don't even know how to process it. So that's
Blue
my
screen.
one example. What now?
Blue screen.
Blue screen. Yes, absolutely. So.
We can let our lovely third panelist,
Yes.
whose name I just forgot because I'm terrible with names.
I'm Casey.
Thank
I'm
you.
also terrible with names.
Okay.
My side of it is a little bit different.
Which is awesome because
Yeah.
I don't want us to get too focused on we see this character as autistic.
Well, and it's fair points, and but I also see a lot of myself in that as well.
Which I think is really cool. If you ever feel like we're getting too into this character is this thing, let us know and we'll contain our enthusiasm a little.
So, my kind of angle comes from someone who has antisocial personality disorder, which is the new way of saying that you are a sociopath. And that is a term that Sherlock himself calls, he says he's a high-functioning sociopath, which there are a lot of people trying to diagnose him. This is BBC Sherlock. That's where I'm mostly most familiar with that in canon. And there are people constantly trying to diagnose him. There are all sorts of things throwing out. And self-diagnosis is a perfectly valid form of diagnosis. If you run across a certain framework that you tend to think your brain fits in, then it is nice to have, oh yes, I'm not that weird, because there's a name for it. So there's a lot of misconception about antisocial personality disorder and that sort of thing, that it's very much tied into psychopath. In a lot of popular culture, they tend to be thrown about as almost the exact same thing, which it's fairly close. But being said, you can be a sociopath and you can be a psychopath and not want to violently murder people. It's much in the way of the things that Sherlock Holmes are really good at doing: observation and deduction. Emotions and sympathy and empathy don't necessarily come naturally. It's something that you observe other people doing and how other people react in situations, and then say, ah yes, so this is how we do it. As a child, I felt very much like I was doing experiments on all of my friends constantly to see how people react in situations. So, what are they going to do if I do this? Okay, so that's the reaction that you get. And it's building up a whole repertoire of the way people react when presented with certain things, and then learning what's okay and what's not okay. That line, defining that. And so you spend your entire life studying the human race, which is what Sherlock Holmes does and why I went into drama, because acting, that's exactly what you're doing. So it's was very nice to find a character, because there are so very few of them who are relatable. To find a character who is like you, and who sort of has gone through the same journey. One of the moments that really sticks with me is when Sherlock always checks with John and says, not okay. And John's like, it's not okay. And so it's having a touchstone to come back to, and then always constantly learning from that. So that's kind of where I come from. And then also I'm an asexual person, which kind of ties into another whole level of relating to that character, but that's a different bit off the top. Yeah. So there is that.
Okay, so I guess before I go into my little spiel, does anyone have any questions or anything right now? Yes. You want to do your job? Okay, sorry.
I have a question. Has there been an exploration of the possibility that BBC Sherlock is suffering from BPD as aside stemming from his antisocial personality?
Is that borderline or
That's borderline personality.
Okay. Yeah.
None of us, or do you know about BPD?
From personal experience,
I know a little.
I was about to say, you
very
can take
similar. There are a lot of really similar aspects, and that's what's so. It's really hard to pin down like one specific thing, because he's been coded for a lot of different things.
Yeah, which is what I'm gonna get into, is like,
yeah,
just in general, no matter how you personally read him, he definitely reads as neurodivergent.
And what's great about that is that there are a lot of people who are atypical, who can find bits of themselves in another atypical character, and because we haven't come out and said exactly what he has, and we haven't written the character to exactly fit that line of behavior, then a lot of different atypical people can find themselves in that, because there is a lot of crossover in a lot of it. Personality disorders, there is a lot of crossover, and so yeah, I could just as easily argue the borderline personality as I could as a antisocial personality.
Yeah, and if you want, I just kind of looked up a little bit of a definition.
Yeah.
Of borderline personality disorder. Do you want to?
Okay, her, then her.
Yeah.
Just while we're throwing out overlapping.
Yeah, definitely. And there is a lot of
There's a
overlap.
lot,
There's
yeah.
a lot of
There's quite a bit of
comorbidity, meaning
yeah.
things that occur together. So,
Again, in relating personally to Sherlock in my own way, I also really appreciate an ADHD interpretation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
of
definitely.
Behavior, in terms of sort of the stimulus seeking, the intolerance for the sort of lulls of handling what isn't possible. Again, the things about not being able to contain the opportunity to share information, those sorts of things, seeking stimulants as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's another avenue into appreciating what is
yeah, and I don't think any of us are trying to, like, pin him down and say
Definitely
he
not.
is this thing. This is how we personally interpret it. What we're trying to say mostly is that we think that, it is super valid and understandable to read him as some flavor of neurodivergent, and
different interpretations
Yeah.
lead you in kind of different areas. It depends on who is running the show and writing the scripts, as to kind of what they emphasize and what they downplay.
yeah. And did you guys want me to do like a quick kind of definition of borderline personality disorder? Okay. So this is from borderlinepersonalitydisorder.com, which is the National Education Alliance for Borderline Personality Disorder. It says it's a serious psychiatric illness. People with BPD have extreme difficulties regulating their emotions. Common problems include anger, chaotic relationships, impulsivity, unstable sense of self, suicidal attempts and thoughts, self-harm, shame, fears of abandonment, and chronic feelings of emptiness. They often have intense and stormy relationships. Their attitudes toward people may shift suddenly, etc.
Yeah, it's very, because I was going to say, my daughter, she's a wife and mother.
You think you can speak up a little bit?
Okay, my daughter, who is a very successful makeup artist and a wife and mother and
Mhm.
quite high functioning, but I think that one reason it's really good that they haven't pinned it down is in the course of her life, so far, it depends on who we're seeing.
Oh,
Because so far
definitely,
she's been
yeah.
They say she's been panic disorder, ADHD. At the moment, it's ADHD and bipolar, and I think that's probably where she's going to stay. But she's been through at least 6 or 7 different analysis depending on who she's seeing at any particular moment. So even if they can't pin down,
Yeah.
they change.
Absolutely, and I'm really glad you brought that up because I feel like some people, who, especially neurotypical people, sometimes have this idea of mental illness, mental disorder, developmental disabilities, etc., as being these really clear, concrete categories, and that is so not the case. There's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of gray area. I've personally been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive personality disorder and a handful of other things. I'm kind of like, maybe, but I kind of think it's more like this stuff, but it's not worth it enough to get a diagnosis. And yeah.
Right here in the front.
Oh, I just also wanted to make the argument for comorbidity and the fact that it is possible to have two similar diagnoses. And
Yes.
sometimes the doctors may like, well, it could be any of these things.
Yeah.
So pick one out of the hatch.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, like my most recent psychiatrist and I are both of the opinion that I could have bipolar disorder. Maybe. If I do, it's bipolar 2, which tends to be the less intense version. Maybe.
Red shirt, bold choice for a con.
I might be a little bit behind the curve on this, but I've just started noticing research about how kids who are identified as gifted as adults are still developmentally different than their peers, and
Yes.
also that there's a lot of
Oh, yes.
comorbidity and intersectionality on other.
Yes.
I don't know about the word diagnosis because I don't know that gifted is ever given as a diagnosis. But
yeah.
that I'm just
You do
curious
get a
about opinions
test.
on that.
You do get a test.
Oh, really?
Yes.
You are
get
tested.
Yeah, I was Rose, weren't you all were you
Yes,
also?
yes,
Yeah,
there's,
Rose and I were both gifted.
There's a word for it, and I
was
can't
as
remember what it's
well,
called, but
yeah.
it's like it's
Yeah.
like double, both like a lot of developmentally disabled people
have extreme
have both
deficits as well as
like very
extreme,
extreme strengths too.
Magic Men.
Yes.
I was also tested into gifted. I don't know if most people know this, but the gifted program in school is considered part
Special
of
ed.
the special ed.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
Special ed.
I'm just curious, but too, like, as a part of fandom, I don't know how many people were, but I seem to see a lot of people come from one of those gifted programs.
Yes.
Yes.
Me and Rose for sure. Yeah.
Amy.
I wanted to say something pertinent to what you said because I recently read research that indicates that I think it's every 20 IQ points or every 30 you're no longer able to communicate. So people who are testing into gifted, depending on IQ, are actually testing into categories where they're no longer able to as effectively communicate with people. Depending on the more gifted you get, obviously that gap is broadening, and that's where you see, lots of things like imitation game, not to tangent off, where a lot of very sad things happen because you have people who are testing up. So they actually are starting to quantify what is the gap, at what point do you see people who can't even, make a meeting of the minds because there's such a, and that, to me, that applies to neurodiversity because that's like neurodiversity of intelligence. That's, we might not call that a disorder, but like you're saying, that's a special ed category because people need to be served in a different way, I think.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I once had a therapist because I have kind of severe OCD. So I once had a therapist who told me very seriously, we spent like an hour and a half on it, that I put too much meaning into words and that other people don't do that. And I was like, how can you not? And I still don't understand it.
No.
I don't understand it. I don't. I don't know what she meant.
Yeah. One thing.
So disregarded.
Yeah, one thing I want to say in regard to that is the IQ testing can be helpful, but I think it is also a pretty flawed tool. It's very culturally biased. But it's really hard to get definitive, solid, quantitative.
Yeah.
Quantitative, sorry, it's been a while since I was in college. Yes, quantitative, as in like with numbers and percentages and things like that. Data on neurodiversity.
Well, I know that, for me, I was tested whenever I was a very young child. And I knew that I was gifted, but my mother I still don't know what my IQ was. Because
Mine's
my mother
124.
never told me, which made me think that it was really high.
That is really distressing.
No, that is standard.
Yeah,
That is
my
standard.
mother never told me.
The school tells them not to.
Yeah, and my mother was also a teacher.
I don't know mine either.
And so
It's really alarming.
it was, and part of it was I already, I at a very young age knew that I was smarter than every single person in
I'm
the
gonna high five you with this.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so
That'd be such a
my
Sherlock
mother
to
did
say.
not. My mother was
Yeah.
like, yes, you are smarter than all of your teachers, but they have a degree and you do not. And until you have a degree, you keep your mouth shut. And so I shut down and I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't have any friends. I did my homework and I read. And so I can see kind of both sides of that argument if you do know the exact number of your IQ. But I also kind of wish that I knew.
My mom yelled at me when I got the IQ test.
Yeah.
We had the school called her in the middle of summer. And they're like, we need to have a meeting with you at the school about Heather's test scores. And so she took me to my elementary school, and like I was playing in the playground, and she had this meeting with like 3 people. And when we came out, we got in the car, and I was like, what are we gonna do now? She's like, I need to talk to you. And like she's like, you are very smart. I'm like, yeah, Daddy tells me that all the time.
She's like, no, you don't understand.
No, it's the bad
She's
times.
like, here's the thing. You're going to be in this special class at school. And if you ever act like you're smarter than anyone else in the family or anyone else at your school, I will pull you right out of that class and you'll never be able to go to it again. And I was just like, what did I do? I had no idea what the meeting was about. I'm just like, school in the summer, yay! So, oh my God, my mom is calling me right now.
We're burning.
That's hilarious.
That clearly says mama.
No, it says mama. We're not making this up. Maybe we can take like a couple more questions before I reel it back in toward fandom a little.
She's been waiting.
Going on the idea of the special ed thing.
Do you think you could speak up a little more?
Yeah, hi, sorry. It's been a long weekend.
No, I understand.
The special ed thing made me remember from personal experience, when I was a child, I grew up in the 90s, and we didn't have a lot of these terms that were readily accessible to us, and it was very kind of stigmatized as other. You know, if you were in special ed, that didn't mean you were gifted or smart or anything. It just meant kind of you were other. Yeah. And I remember getting tested into special ed, going into special ed, and going to my mom and being like, I don't want to go, and like not going, and because of the stigma. And you look back at it and you think like, maybe I should have gone, you know, but you didn't. And so it's really interesting to sit here in 2015 and hear people talk about this in like a really fascinating way, because it's like, where were you guys when I was 10 or 12? Like, this is really cool. So I just want to say that.
Hi. Just wanting to offer a British perspective. We don't do IQ tests. We do IQ tests. We can have an IQ test, but we don't use them in the school system. We have something called CATs, which are split into 3. They do verbal communication, mental cognition, and I think the other one is general knowledge. And you take that at 11, and that determines your entire academic career right up until you do university. I failed all of mine spectacularly because I had a very bad attention span. I just hate the school system entirely. So our way of testing through IQ, if we want to talk about modern Sherlock Holmes, who's usually British, that wouldn't have been a thing for him. He would not have been tested by IQ standards. And additionally,
which is good to know. Fanfic authors take note.
Yes. And additionally, our idea of gifted and talented is very different. It's not to do with neurodiversity. It's not to do with your IQ test. It literally is to do with your exam results. So usually gifted and talented, in our perspective, is not full of neurodivergent people at all. It is usually supremely intelligent people who is very class-based. It's very, it's usually white, middle-class kids, usually male, who fit in the gifted and talented. So it's very unusual for me to hear these sort of terms, purely from a British perspective. Britain as a whole is also not as good as America in terms of neurodiversity. We don't have a lot of these terms. We don't hear them very often. I think the most common term I've heard used so far is ADHD and bipolar in British vernacular of neurodivergent sort of discussions. So I just wanted to throw that out there. We don't do IQ. My IQ is also very low. I think my IQ is like 34, but that's also, I think, a cultural thing. So I just wanted to offer that from a British perspective, it's a very different ballpark.
It's very fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's not actually that different than private schools in the US, because that's sort of how because I grew up in a private Christian school from K through 12. So
Yeah.
That's very similar to my experience more than it was all based on test scores. I only know of the public school system because of people I know who have done it, or also I have 2 children, so they have both been in ESE and gifted. So
from a younger age, our tests are split into 3, and we are much more sort of streamlined, and it's awful. If you fail them, you will get bad predictions, you will get bad recommendations, and that's an 11, which is so cool. Can you imagine, you know,
yeah, that sounds really stressful.
Your entire life.
It is.
Yeah.
Potter started Hogwarts at 11.
Sorry?
That's why Harry Potter started Hogwarts at 11.
Right.
Yes.
Red shirt and a Star Trek jacket. Brave woman, go.
Non-woman
Brave
person.
Yes. Sorry, I couldn't read it. I apologize.
Yeah, I went to public school. I was in talented and gifted. We called it TAG. And yeah, it's actually really similar. There's a lot of, I mean, I grew up in a fairly, you know, well-off white area, but like TAG was especially like the kids who lived in the really big neighborhoods. There were a lot more of them in TAG than there weren't. The people who lived in the really expensive houses were all in TAG. And you know, and it's because they had the resources.
Yeah, I was about to say that
their
is
parents were
an
involved, and they
diatribe.
had, you know, tutors and all of that sort of stuff, and from a very young age, and they just had, their parents had the time, really.
Which is very unfortunate that our education is so tied into the amount of money that we have.
But I was also going to say that going back a little ways to communication and having difficulty communicating between people, and then I want to add in, you know, mental issues there, because I tend to communicate in a very highly verbose way. I tend to use large syllable words because.
Do you read a lot? Because I do that.
Yeah, and like especially when I was actively in college in my anthropology program, and
I have a bachelor's in anthropology. We need to talk.
Me too. And anthropology is like the discipline of giant words, and they were so concise, and they said, you know, a paragraph's worth of stuff in a word, and I'd use it. And my sister, you know, who had just graduated high school, like months early too, so that was impressive. And then, but she was like, I feel so stupid every time you talk, and I feel like you are trying to make me feel like a bad person. And I was like, I'm so sorry, that's not what I mean. These are the only words I can use.
I know how that is.
And she has, she's one of those people who's been diagnosed with something different everywhere she goes. But there's a lot of the sort of, you know, self-esteem, and a lot of the I'm not good enough, and a lot of like everybody hates me kind of stuff. And so that sort of insecurity was only exacerbated by the fact that, you know, she felt like my vocabulary was so inaccessible to her.
Okay, one more, and then we're gonna
reel it back in a little bit more toward fandom.
Yeah. My question is to try to bring it back more toward fandom, because your question really made me wonder about something. We were talking about school and testing from the British point of view, and BBC Sherlock, we have to interrogate that text, if you will, from that British perspective. And I'm realizing I don't know how the BDSM definition of high functioning.
The DSM. Sorry. This is not an 18 and up panel. It's okay. It's Sunday morning.
DSM differs from whatever the British version of that Bible of definitions is. Does anyone know?
Just based on my interaction with psychology and British mental health, we do have some very specific differences. I do feel like British discussion of mental health is very different from American. I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but Britain as a whole is very much more reserved on the subject of mental health. We don't have as many resources, we don't have as many definitions as Lucas pointed out, Asperger's is still on the identification spectrum of British mental health. Things like PTSD is not as advanced in Britain in terms of research and discussion as it is here in America.
Well, and one gets the impression that it's less out there. People discuss it less.
Yeah. What I see when I watch BBC Sherlock is that his sort of mannerisms, they're considered to be in line with his class. A lot of middle class people fall into that sort of reserved, what they would call eccentric sort of behavior. So Mycroft as well.
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
my master's thesis, I wrote about two British plays that dealt with mental illness specifically, and it seems like it is there's a huge stigma attached, and then also it has more to do with class than I think anything.
But a lot of it's to do with British culture. British people are considered eccentric already.
Yes.
You know, the umbrella, the weather. So Sherlock and Mycroft, respectively, are just considered as eccentric middle-class men.
Yes.
And Sherlock probably as a child would have had it sort of enhanced for him that because he's from middle class and he probably went to private school, that sort of eccentricity would have been
it was reinforced.
Yeah, it would not have been considered ultimately different. If you went to
or sociopathic in any way.
Yeah, if you went to
so him self-identifying as sociopathic is not necessarily something that's...
It wouldn't have been said to him.
Something that, or you know, it's rather unusual for somebody to state that in public in the first place.
Because what I find different from elementary is when you speak to Mycroft makes a comment about how they had him tested for something.
Yeah.
Which
towards the end of season 2, Mycroft reveals to Yoder who Mycroft and Sherlock were torturing in a scene, so there's the context of that, where Mycroft is like, various experts assessed Sherlock, which would have been like in his teens, like around like 14, 15, 16, around that time, and the results were inconclusive, and it's just like, that was like the almost moment for canon autistic Sherlock in Painted Black. Another sort of like almost moment was very recently in The View from Olympus, when Sherlock talks about why he doesn't want to father any children, why he doesn't want to spread his genetics. He talks a lot about how his sensitivities hurt him, how like everything he sees, touches, feels, and things like that really give him pain all the time. And it's just like, even if like you don't code him as autistic, he has some sensory processing stuff like up the wazoo. Like his sensory stuff is like, it's fascinating to learn, and it's painful because it's painful to him, you know.
Okay.
Did we want to go more into like sensory stuff?
I was gonna, we can do that a little bit. I was just gonna briefly kind of go into like a couple. I admit I have not yet read all of the original canon ACD, but you know, I did start rereading some of them recently, and I kind of highlighted a couple passages where I'm like, one of them gives me a lot of feelings about him possibly having bipolar disorder, but just in general read as him being neurodivergent. Are you cool with me doing that really quick?
Oh, yeah.
So, so I've got these are from... It's going to take me too long to figure this out. It's like the first story.
Oh, that's
Yeah, A Study in Scarlet. For example, this one passage that I highlighted says, "Nothing could exceed his energy when the working fit was upon him, but now and again a reaction would seize him, and for days on end he would lie upon the sofa in the sitting room, hardly uttering a word or moving a muscle from morning to night. On these occasions I have noticed such a dreamy expression in his eyes that I might have suspected him of being addicted to the use of some narcotic had not the temperance and cleanliness of his whole life forbidden such a notion." So for me, that reads as specifically bipolar disorder, but there's a lot of, even just from starting with studying Scarlet, there's a lot of stuff about like how different his thinking is. And just as a quick definition of bipolar disorder, because I know there tends to be some misinformation about it. It's a mental disorder characterized by periods of elevated mood and periods of depression. So during the elevated mood, which is mania or hypomania is a lesser version, you might have decreased need or desire to sleep, increased appetite, increased sex drive, and then depression. I feel like more people are familiar with that, but lower energy, either excessive or sometimes less, a whole lot less of sleep, increased or decreased eating, etc. So bipolar disorder is where you have those two poles and tend to fluctuate between the two. But yeah, yes. Did you still want to do the sensory thing?
I wanted to talk about PC Sherlock and sensory stuff. So, well, actually, I was gonna sort of talk. Sorry, I got lost for a second.
It's Sunday morning. It's okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk real quick about the one scene that I remember in BBC Sherlock as being complete sensory overload. So we talk about in elementary because it's really obvious in elementary, but there's only a couple scenes in BBC Sherlock that really stick out to me as being I need everybody to shut up, which is the drugs bust scene in the first episode.
Yes.
Where it not only are people coming into his personal space and he's trying to solve his case, but he's trying to think, and he has Anderson face the other way, and everybody shut up just so he can think. So that's
Mrs. Hudson.
Mrs. Hudson. Yes, and I know there's other ones like that, but that's there also the we could talk real quick about the in season 2, the Hounds of Baskerville, the fireplace scene. We could talk about the complete meltdown, how that's it's affecting his senses. He can't trust what he thinks, and that's the difference between a shutdown and a meltdown. Is that a meltdown is similar to a panic attack. It's
everything, your brain is
yeah. So it's I can go back to talking about his brain as a computer being an overload of information, and you can even go back to the original canon stories. I wrote down a quote from I forgot what story it was from, but
one of the many.
It says, "My mind is like a racing engine, tearing itself to pieces because it is not connected up with the work for which it was built. Life is commonplace, the papers are sterile, audacity and romance seem to have passed forever from the criminal world. Can you ask me then whether I'm ready to look into any new problem, however trivial it may prove?" And I know there's a scene in elementary that is like a complete parallel to that.
Did you have that quoted down? Because I don't.
I don't, but we could just talk about it even if it's not
Let me consult my color-coded notes.
It's in that. Seriously. It's in that one scene in the group therapy where it's the very beginning of the episode.
It's in season 2. It's in one of the episodes Mycroft is in. Before coming to the con, I rewatched all the Mycroft episodes because he is, to me, the autism sibling trademark. In which, if you want, I can explain that. Here we are. In season 2, episode 7, The Marchioness, if I pronounced that incorrectly, I apologize. Sherlock's at a support group meeting, and he says, "My senses are unusually, one might even say, unnaturally keen. And ours is an era of distraction, punishing drumbeat of constant input. It's cacophony, which follows us into our homes and into our beds. It seeps into our souls, for want of a better word. For a long time, there was one solution for my raw nerve endings, and that was copious drug use. So, in my less productive moments, I'm given to wonder, if I had just been born when it was a little quieter out there, would I have even become a drug addict in the first place? Might have I been a little more focused, more fully realized person? Just before everything got amplified." So, yeah, that's definitely an example of, a whole bunch of sensory things going on.
We've only got like 5 minutes left, so you guys just want to take questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, right?
Just if anybody's interested, she was talking about the story that picture will scare you.
Yeah.
They.
Thank you.
They. Sorry.
It's okay.
I can't see.
No,
I
I know.
I don't even have it on, so it's
Sorry.
that's my bad.
So yes, we will be taking questions now. Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah, I was about to say this is
your job.
My job.
Can you speak up a little bit?
What I thought was interesting, I don't know your name, but if you hear.
Mine, Rose. Yes.
Rose. What you were saying, like in season 1 of BBC Sherlock, season 2 of BBC Sherlock, like scenes that like kind of look at like, oh, okay, hold on. But for me, one of the scenes that struck me the most was in season 3. And everybody focuses on the wedding scene for like all the like big like romance drama stuff. But the scene that really struck me is when Sherlock is seducing and slaps him across the face. And I remember just like,
Yes.
like, oh my god. And because it's really relatable, and I think that it's kind of an aspect of mental illness that
Yeah.
people don't talk about, is that like sometimes the violence comes inward. Like, it's like,
Yes.
and I remember seeing that and being like really shocked, like, holy crap, this is me this whole time. It's like this sort of like, everything becomes so overwhelming that you need to be able to channel and focus into one place, and sometimes that turns into like internalized violence.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of really interesting, and really like ever seeing that coach up and being someone who's neurotypical, like that was like the big like moment for me, because I was like, I was like, I was like, no, that's not like just like, oh, everyday behavior. Most people don't get overwhelmed and slap themselves in the face. So I was like,
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that a lot of people with mental illness, a lot of people who are autistic, who have developmental disabilities, etc., can totally relate to.
Oh yes.
Okay, I think this is probably going to be the last because we got like 2 minutes.
Can we talk about the napkin origami scene?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Let's talk about that.
Rose, do you want to talk about the napkin origami scene?
We can all.
You, Rose.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. So, So this is in season 3 of BBC Sherlock. I feel like he gets stressed out. He knows that John and Mary are talking about him in the other room, so he's like, "You've left me. I'm going to make all these origami little things," and it's a form. That's a form of stimming too, because
almost anything.
Yeah,
can be
like
stimming.
I'm a big knitter, and I will knit and knit and knit. It's like a more socially acceptable way of doing that, but
it's a soothing thing that you don't have to think about.
yeah, absolutely.
It's
you're like, how did that happen?
That's why I wrap every single Christmas present at Christmas, because it's just that.
Yes.
Yeah, or like the leg. A lot of people do the leg bouncing thing, or
yes, but it's like
chew their
it's
nails.
like a calming repetition thing, and it's like something he could focus his mind on while trying not to think about what else is going on. So, because that was like a really pivotal moment in the series, anyways, because everything is going to change. He knows everything is going to change, and he's trying to do what he can do. I mean, he's planning the freaking wedding himself, like, he's planning somebody else's wedding, regardless of how you read any of that. But
so I just want to say, first of all, thank you guys for coming. This is my first ever panel. Also, sorry if I kind of took over. I kind of do that. If you guys want to contact, or I'm down to being contacted about this. I know you two are. If you guys want to contact us about, if you have any remaining questions or anything you want a clarification on, I don't know how many of us have our URLs written down. You can also just post in the tag and be like, hey, I want to talk. Who are the neurodiversity people? I want to talk to you.
Yep.
So the tag on Tumblr, if you're on Tumblr.
And also, if you want to talk to any of us, like immediately after, like we could talk outside of the room,
or go bug Heather, and Heather will come find.
I'm pretty sure that there's something going on immediately after. Yeah.
If not, Carter is open 24/7, so y'all can go to the Carter room and continue any discussion you'd like.
Yeah.
there's a blank in the schedule here.
Then you can keep this room if you want for another hour, but some people may be wanting to go to the Babes podcast or something, so you probably need to head out now if that's where you want to go.
Yeah, but thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.